Cool. Okay. So if we want to make a start, my name is Jim Valentine. I'm the Deputy Head of Student Services here at Ravensbourne. We just thought we would host this session because we felt it might be a really interesting insight for students that are able to join us into kind of, is there a new normal? How has COVID affected things? And also, I think practically for everyone, what are the kind of best practices to approach companies that you're hoping to work for, especially in light of how virtual the world is becoming at the moment. So if I just want to go around the panelists, if you just want to maybe introduce yourselves and talk for a minute about kind of what you do and your experiences and where you're coming from. Emily, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, hi everyone. It's very exciting to be here with you all. My name's Emily Gale and I'm a talent executive, and some of you may know what that means, but for those of you that don't, it's like being a matchmaker. So my job is to find the people to work on shows in the TV industry, and that's production talent. So those are the people that make the shows or who develop them. I've been in the industry for a very long time. I almost don't want to tell you how long, but I started my career at the BBC, working both in London and in New York. So I have worked, my background is in reality, factual documentary. And then about 13 years ago, I switched roles and I became a headhunter. So finding the best freelance talent in the industry and recommending them to productions who hopefully then hire them. So that's my job. So I've done that for a long time. So I think I've got a pretty good sense of how to approach companies and what to say and what not to say.
Cheers, thank you. Going around my screen then, Faraz? Oh, you're muted.
See, it's taken all this time and I've still got used to it. The pandemic won't be over until I figure out how to use a mute button. Hello, I'm Faraz. I run a small independent production company called Goldwaller. We do lots of different factual content for digital platforms and TV channels. And I've been working on that for a few years. Before that, I ran a different production company who's doing a lot of stuff around music, live events, and a lot of stuff with music artists. And previous to that, I was the editor of education at Channel 4. I actually met Emily very early on in my career, exactly in the path that she told me about, kind of having to make those contacts and persuade people like Emily to champion for me and advocate for me, which I think is a lot of what this conversation is going to be about, is building advocates and getting your name out there.
Cheers, thank you. And then Darian.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Darian. I've got a company called Fin London, which I've ran for about 16 years now. I'm an ex-student of Ravensbourne from the broadcast op days, and yeah, Fin is pretty much very similar to Faraz's company. We're a production company. We kind of do quite sort of technical work, sort of post-production work specifically. And a lot of sort of TV commercials. We do broadcast programs as well. We've done a few commissions, and but my background was primarily sort of post-production, and then led more into production. And so I started off using a lot of things like Flame and well, going back to Quantel gear, if anyone still remembers that. But yeah, so I kind of that kind of led us into very much quite a specific sort of high-tech level of production work which we do. So we do a lot of sort of graphics, motion control, game engine stuff, and all that kind of work really. But we're based in Soho, so we're one of the last companies that still are based in Soho. A lot of them have moved out now, but yeah, we're still here in Soho Square.
Great. And then, so I guess for a first question, I guess if we go back the other way, Darian, if you don't mind, if we start with you. I guess the first question a lot of students have been asking us is, do you feel your work's been affected by kind of COVID? Do you think there is a new normal, and what actually is that? Or what does that look like for you?
Yes, I mean, I think it's interesting because obviously, like sort of for us, we're a supply industry, really. We're a service industry, sorry, and you are very much sort of dictated by the issues your clients are going through, the problems they're having at the moment. Many of our commercial clients are obviously, in some of them more difficult situations than others at the moment, depending on what their sort of market sector is. So on our sort of commercial side of the business that we're doing at the moment, which is, you know, a substantial amount of our income, then yes, you know, the knock-on has been quite effective to how we deal with things. It's also been quite, you know, different to how the way we film things at the moment. Obviously, we've obviously there's guidelines on and how you should film and produce things at the moment, which has changed the way we've worked. And right now, being in this sort of present lockdown, then, you know, we are literally down to a skeleton crew in the office. We're literally about 3 of us here at the moment. We're in an office which normally has sort of up about 15, 20. Everyone else is working remotely, and it requires in itself a whole new sort of skill set in a way, because you've got to be a lot more proactive by yourself. You've got to sort of, you know, people are having to sort of take on a lot of stuff on their own, and rather than just work quite, you know, in a group or team. I mean, our office here outside is very open plan, and which I'll come back to a little bit later. And that, you know, it's at the moment with 3 of you in the room, the discussions just aren't quite there. You know, it is a creative industry. You know, it's creative. You know, creativity works by people talking freely, and in a room, and just bouncing off and going off into a room and chatting about things a little bit more. And, you know, and it's much nicer to be on sort of face-to-face communication rather than just living in the land of Zoom, which we all seem to be. So yeah, I mean, the fundamentals there have changed, and you know, and we're also using the cloud a lot more, which we were kind of heading that way anyway, but it's certainly for things like handling projects, and I'm sort of sure Faraz will come on to this as well. You know, it's a lot more is happening up there in the cloud than we've ever done before.
Cheers, that's great, thank you. So going back the same way then, Faraz?
It's been interesting for us actually, because we are still a fairly new company, so we were in the process of growing or establishing ourselves when the pandemic hit. And then, so when it first actually arrived, I actually personally got COVID quite early, and that wiped me out for about a week. And then I spoke to my business partner, who's based down in Bristol, and we were a little bit like, we're going to have to kind of quieten things down, and it's probably not going to be a very busy time, and our expectations were quite low. So we were worried, and obviously we had kind of childcare issues as well, which I think is a big issue around this. Is it's really exposed other commitments that individuals have outside the workplace, and I think people have fortunately been a bit more honest and frank about that, and found solutions, rather than expecting everyone to just be robots and get on with it. But we kind of were concerned to start with, but by hook or by crook, we've actually done, you know, I feel almost embarrassed by saying it, but we've done all right. You know, we've kind of grown quite significantly in this period. Our first series comes out in a couple of weeks for CBBC. We've done a documentary for BBC Three, which is the biggest documentary that we've done. We've continued to make things for BBC Education. I think I would say, and I feel quite strongly about this, that we are very blessed in this country to have a public service broadcaster of such size, that has allowed the whole industry to continue operating away from the commercial pressures, because some of the commercial broadcasters have been very hard hit. And I do wonder what would have happened if we didn't have a public service broadcaster. But I think that other than that, we've been okay. The weird thing, I guess, which is an idiosyncrasy of this period, is I've had lots of teams do lots of productions, and I've only met, I would say, a handful of them. The rest of them have been like this on Zoom. You know, the director of my biggest documentary, still never, lovely guy, met him a lot on Zoom, still never met him in real life. Still never met a lot of my production teams and research teams, which is a blessing and a curse. It has meant that we've been able to hire across the country, and in lots of different places, without having that anxiety of people coming into an office and seeing how they can commute. But it has also meant that, exactly like Darian said, that the human face-to-face contact, where a lot of the development happens, has been a bit more of a struggle. So, you know, it's accelerated a number of things, like technology, like different ways of working, like finding talent, etc. And I think that once, fingers crossed, things get back a little bit back to normal, my hope is that we won't just revert back into the same old ways, but we'll pick up some of the lessons that we've learned in this period and try and adapt to what is the new future around streaming and digital platforms and international productions.
That's great, thank you. And I guess, Emily, working in sort of talent, I don't know whether you have a...
I know it's really interesting. Yeah, sorry, Jim.
No, I was just wondering how broad your experience is then of whether there is those differences between commercial broadcasters and like the state and the BBC, and whether there's different approaches that you're seeing.
I think there always has been, and there always will be. I mean, I think in terms of what Faraz was saying, it's really difficult because in a sense, everyone's had such a different experience of it. You know, in terms of freelancers, I would say you couldn't definitively say no runners have found work, but all executive producers have. But actually, it's just been very much about a singular experience, you know, because I found that some people have been okay and have managed, particularly those working in development. Other people who've been working on production have had those productions halted or delayed, or the broadcasters have changed what they wanted, or they've given them less money. So I couldn't sort of summarize succinctly the sort of the industry experience. But what I would say is that I think that it's what people have realized is that they have to, whereas in the past, perhaps you think you're going to get a job next month, I think realistically people have realized that isn't going to happen. And part of it has been the acceptance, not that that is ideal, that people haven't had work, but to be realistic, but to still keep persevering, because that's the other thing. I mean, I know several people who 2 weeks ago were saying to me, it had been so quiet, they were sort of wondering if they'd ever work again. Suddenly both found work. So, you know, I think that I'm a real optimist, and I think that a bit like Darian was saying, that we do need to be together. We're a collaborative industry, we're creative, and I don't believe that we will have some radical change. Yes, as Faraz says, hopefully we'll have good change in that we'll work more in the regions, that we won't be so London-centric, that people with kids will find it easier because they don't have to go into the office 5 days a week. So I think there'll be hopefully really good aspects, but I don't believe that COVID will change our industry radically for the long-term future. I think in the short term, yes, but I don't think we will be in this position. We all need entertainment desperately, in whichever way that comes. So we need the content. So I'm really positive despite the current situation. But I do understand that it's very hard if you're trying to find work, and particularly if you're a graduate or you're about to graduate, thinking to yourself, will I ever find a job in the industry? I think you will, but it just you have to be realistic that it may take longer than you think.
Thank you. Yeah. So I guess if we go back round everyone again, it might be interesting to talk about that from a perspective of what your company is looking for from a new graduate, where you are able to kind of look for those sort of positions right now, and what might be the best way, or the best ways you've seen for graduates to kind of demonstrate their skills or approach you as a company. Do you want to, is that okay if you want to start with that, Darian?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because I was, you know, I know there's been a great deal of debate about CVs and what, you know, whether you use CVs, we go onto some of the more, you know, specific job sites and start sort of posting yourself there. I think it's a mixture of both. I kind of feel, you know, I mean, we just recruited recently for a new project, several people, and I'm a diehard CV. I like CVs, and you know, and the reason why I like them is because, you know, they're, you know, it's a nugget. It's a real little quick insight into, you know, who this person is, you know, brief history. They can always, I mean, my favorite ones are the obviously I would say is everything on one page, you know, for a start. Keep it clear, keep it simple, and just put the real nuggets on there that you feel demonstrate, you know, what you're into, the passions you've got, any work experience, and where you'd like to sort of see yourself heading as a career. I mean, it's just so simple, sort of kind of breakdowns, and having it on a CV just makes it sort of, you know, it allows. I mean, we still print here occasionally, and if we're going to a meeting with a group of us, then we literally have the CVs on the table in front of us, and we can all study them, and you know, we might go, well, we like that one field, yeah, and so forth, you know, and it's a very sort of malleable thing to have. So And the trouble we found with some job recruitment sites is they're all quite different. They all ask slightly different questions sometimes, and you know, you tend to sort of find, you know, it's sometimes collating the material off different job sites plus CVs. It all gets a bit complicated. Whereas if you've got a CV from everyone, it does feel like this is the de facto sort of single page of who this person is, plus obviously a cover letter as well, if required. Yeah, so I am a fan of CVs still here. I think we all are. So, and generally we all work with quite a deal with CVs. So I don't know about you, Faraz. What about you? Are you a CV kind of guy?
I mean, this conversation and why this happened came out of a big chat that we had about CVs and how we felt about them. I mean, personally, I think CVs in our industry are really problematic. I think that they, in no way. I think a lot of the thing about the people that you look for in these industries, particularly from the creative side of things, is how they approach things and what they've approached. And it's very clear when you get a CV to kind of see what sort of shows they've worked on, but it's very difficult to understand, you know, what they got out of it, what worked and what didn't work. And invariably, a lot of creative work and a lot of television, and it's not even just a case of creativity, but a lot of television is based around problem solving. And when you have a CV and when you apply for a job, you're always putting your best self forward and you want to demonstrate that, you know, you're amazing at everything and you can do everything. And actually, when things become most useful is when you can talk about how you've encountered a problem and how you solved that problem. And it's quite difficult to kind of communicate that via a CV or even via a very quick interview or a phone chat. I think that as we've grown as a business, we have leaned on people like Emily and some production, some talent finding companies to help us find particularly the key talent. And because having that level of advocacy where someone else has gone through hundreds of, and when we post a job, we do get hundreds and hundreds of people all applying for that job and then trying to find other jobs related to that job. And you just get inundated. And when you're trying to run a production company, it's almost impossible to deal with. The result of that means that sometimes you unfortunately always fall back on what you know and who you know. So we've tried to start engaging with more talent finding individuals and companies along the way so that we can broaden our pool out as a result. And we always go to them and say, look, you know, before you send us a CV, tell us why you're sending this CV. You know, what is it about them that you've been excited about or interested in? And I think that the reality of always having your credits on a CV and seeing what they've done is helpful because, you know, they're making similar sort of shows to what you want to make. But I would very much look for solutions about how we as an industry can capture what people are passionate about and what they want to do, rather than getting them stuck in this feedback loop of, well, that's the only job available and I've done that sort of thing before, so I'm going to do another one of those things again. And then you get a career 10 years down the line where you've never made the thing you wanted to make, but you've got paid, so you've kind of sucked it up. There's no real solution. When I was starting, there was limited solutions to that because the barriers of entry was so high. I would say that, you know, whenever we see people that have made their own things or done a podcast or written articles or made their own films or whatever it might be, have just kind of shaped their voice a little bit more, that always excites us and interests us. And I always look at that first before I look at any of the credits that they've done. Sometimes that's difficult to do for some people, but anything that you can do to demonstrate what it is you're all passionate about beyond just what you've worked on, I find is always really useful.
That's great, thank you. And Emily, I guess you're going to have some, I would imagine, quite a lot of insight into what you think works best, or how you encourage people to present themselves going forward.
The thing is, Jim, it's funny, just briefly on the CV question, I have mixed feelings about it because so often we're time poor. And as Faraz says, what happens is you need somebody, and particularly in the freelance world, you need them to start on Monday. The quickest way, obviously, of recruiting that person is looking at CVs. But in terms of what I would love to see in an ideal world in the future, it's not that we would necessarily lose them, but to give people an alternative. Because one thing I'm really aware of is unconscious bias. So in the past, sometimes when we've hired people through development, we've actually not asked them for CVs. we've asked them to apply, and we've given them an application form, but a fun application form. I don't mean a kind of boring one that would put you off, to really get a sense of them and their sort of creative perspective, with silly questions, but actually you get a really good sense of someone. So I would love, in an ideal world, for us to be more creative about the way we hire people. And I do think we could be, even as much as just taking your names off your CV. I mean, you know, that's such a simple thing, but actually being given a task which sounds dull, but is a really good way of completely getting rid of any thoughts in one's mind about someone and their background or experience, or, you know, what they've done before. But I can also see from Darian's perspective, there are certain jobs where you probably do want to see, particularly in post-production, you want to get a good sense of their credits and what they've done and worked on. But what would I say about CVs in terms of the ones that work and the ones that don't? I suppose one big thing is when Faraz describes advertising a role and then these hundreds of people applying, is apply for jobs that you genuinely could do, because so often we advertise a role and then 200 people apply, but so many of them don't have the right experience. And I understand why they're doing it, because they just want to work, but actually it's a waste of their time, but also it's demoralizing, because you'll apply for jobs and then you go, well, I didn't even get a response. But the point is, you've got to think realistically about starting at entry level, and CVs when you're starting out, I think, should be one page. And I love seeing it when people have been creative about the layout. I don't mean crazy kind of moving JPEGs or anything that's going to sort of slow things down, but just think about, it's really does give you a sense of that person, the personality, even if it's the font is different, but what you do get a sense of the person. So I would say inject a bit of your own personality into it, and don't just go for some sort of formatted Word version.
That's great.
Just going to add to that quickly.
Of course, yeah, please.
I think they're all very good points. Actually, I think with the CV, absolutely, I'd say try and, you know, put your mark on it, put your passions on there. Any sort of, even sort of, you know, interests that you have, hobbies, anything like that, you know, it a little sort of, it does help, you know, getting your personality across. I think you just be over careful. I mean, we had I wish I could show it to you, but I can't really because it's someone else's CV. But it's basically like a very complex infographic and it was so complex that I had to literally sit down and sort of read. You know, it took me about 30 minutes to understand, you know, what this guy did. You know, it was so complex. It was 7% creative, 8% this, 9%, and it was all little bar charts, and it was just way overkill, you know. And I absolutely agree that, you know, then by all means put your own bit of mark on design on CV. Yes, keep it one page, because, you know, we don't have. I mean, if you get a CV of 5 pages, you know, it's just too much, you know, and most of it is detail I don't really need to know. So, you know, it's just keep it simple, keep the nuggets in there, keep a bit of personality in there, and that's really all we need.
I would kind of add, just to kind of add a couple of things to that as well. I just wanted to kind of re-emphasize the point of advocacy, because I think that is really, really important. And as you get later on in your careers, you might get to meet amazing talent managers, and particularly because those people deal with people that are kind of at a more senior level. But I've found that when we're looking to advertise jobs, we will ask people who they know, and that is much more powerful. If you have someone coming up to you saying this person's really good, or they're really interesting, or this is what they've done, or you should have a chat with that person, that's always really, really useful. In these days, there are an obscene amount of Facebook groups and chat groups in lots of different places where you can kind of introduce yourself and let people know what you're about. I found that particularly at our level, when we're a smaller company, we really do value those that support each other. So like when you see something go up and you recommend somebody for it, not just kind of putting your hand up and saying, I'm the right person for this, that is really, really powerful. And I kind of think everyone looking out for each other is how this industry is fueled, and how we've got forward in a lot of putting the right sort of teams together. And I think secondly, and I would argue almost just as importantly, don't ever see it as a one-way thing. Don't ever see it as I'm a person and I need to convince this company that I want that particular job, and I want to fit myself into that mold. There are so many production companies out there doing so many different things. If you do your homework and find the right sort of production company that fits you, that can be really, really powerful. And if you can demonstrate that you're not just kind of carpet bombing 100 different production companies with the same email saying the same thing, but you actually kind of gone through a few production companies that you really feel fit your vision and the sort of content that you want to make, and put that out there. I always say this, everyone working in this industry has got massive, massive egos. And any time that you say, oh, I really liked what you did over there, can I talk to you about it? 9 times out of 10, the ego will go, oh yeah, I love somebody telling me how great I am. Let's have a conversation. And then once you start that conversation, you can then demonstrate what you're about. And hopefully it's like matchmaking, exactly as Emily said, you'll find the right person in the right company, and those two things will come together. So don't ever see it as a numbers game. It should be seen as a kind of creative connection. And the more that you can do some heavy lifting around that to find the right sort of company for you, I think the more successful you can be.
But I think that's such a good point, Faraz. It's so true. And I would say that would probably be my biggest bit of feedback, is that you get so many emails from people that are clearly just generic, that they've just copied and pasted and sent, and your heart sinks. And I just think that also the other thing is, I say to people, I want to hear the story of your life. Please, can you put it in chronological order? Because so many people, you read their CV and you can't make sense of it. They've got dates all over the place. I don't mind what they've done. I just want to know that I can see it in linear form. Whereas when it's all over the place, you can spend half an hour just trying to unpick their experience. Whereas if you put it in the right order, it's like, okay, now I understand, I get it. You had to do that work for 6 months because you were freelance and you couldn't find a job in the industry. I also think interests need to be interesting. So as in, lots of people write socializing, restaurants, it's like, well, hello, everyone loves that. But how are you defining yourself in terms of what is it about you? What assets are you going to bring? And as Faraz says, it's interesting about the whole idea of trying to shoehorn yourself into a role. I think what a lot of people starting out in the industry do is they get hooked on a title more than the actual getting in their foot in the door. So try not to think to yourself, I need to go in as this role. Just think, I need to get in. If it's a receptionist job, an assistant, it doesn't matter. The whole point is you just need to get in there. You'll get stuck in. You start to create a reputation for yourself. And as Faraz was saying, then people start to say, oh gosh, isn't Sam great? Oh, let's offer him a job as a runner after he's finished on reception. So I cannot tell you enough, if you can take away the whole notion of a title and just think, I want work, I don't mind what it is, I'll open. In the olden days, we used to say we'd open letters, like when I worked at the BBC on consumer shows, but you'll do anything. And that is how you get in. And a lot of the time when I talk to people who are starting out, they complain to me that they've sent out 100 CVs. But then when I slowly talk to them, they'll say, oh, well, I'm applying for researcher roles, but they haven't got any research experience yet. So just don't get hung up on the title, just look for the work. And if you're good, people will offer you more work, and that's your springboard to the next position.
Cheers, that's great. I guess just before we move on to any questions that people might have asked, we've all been working remotely for quite a while at this stage. I wonder if each of you on the panel might have a tip or something you found helpful when it comes to working remotely, or something to kind of share to kind of make it more effective, kind of working through a screen. Faraz, I don't know if you've got anything that you could think of.
I think that, and a lot of this, and I know I can absolutely understand that these conversations can be frustrating, and I've made all the mistakes that we've talked about here. I've had 4-page CVs that piss people off. I've used the wrong font. I've probably sent the wrong email to the wrong person. I've definitely done what Darian mentioned earlier about sending pretentious CVs that made no sense whatsoever because I thought I was trying to be clever. I did it throughout the course of my career. I did it all. And that's probably why I had to start on my own company, because I wasn't very good at convincing other people to get them to work with me. But I would say that I kind of re-emphasize this point that there is no one way. And that's the reason why lots of different production companies exist, because there is no uniform. It's not like being a lawyer where you go to law school and then you get a pupillage and then you kind of stay. There is no set criteria about going, do this, do this, do this, do this, and you end up with a job. That's not the world that we live in. It's frustrating, but there are lots of different paths through it. There are websites like Production Base and Talent Manager who do a really good job of organizing and trying to create a system around how you apply for jobs and formatting CVs. There are people that just cold call people, and at the right time, in the right moment, there is something available, and then they've nabbed it in a way that if somebody sent that same email a week later, they would have missed out. Unfortunately, there isn't a science to this. But I would say, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I do think that the honesty around it is really, really important. And some companies aren't like this. You know, I feel quite strongly about it. But when we are talking about things like Zoom or chatting to people and doing interviews, etc., I feel quite strongly that people shouldn't need to feel like they need to turn their cameras on, for instance, if you're having a chat for the first time. You know, some people live in different circumstances in different areas. You know, when we did a show called My Mate's a Muslim, we were interviewing a few female Muslims to be on the production team for that. And just because of my background, I was aware that they would have to get dressed to do a Zoom call. And, you know, when you're living at home, finding something to cover your hair and putting a hijab on, you may not have done that for a week because you've not left your house. And so suddenly having a call with somebody like me means that you need to kind of start thinking about the cultural things that you would normally do automatically have you been going into an office. And I think it's implicit on us as an industry to not just expect everyone to show their home life to us just because we asked them to as part of an interview. But that may not be the case with other bigger companies. They may be like, this is the way we do things. If you don't like it, go and apply for a job elsewhere. So I think that if you can continue to be honest about what you can offer the company and what not necessarily compromises, but like what you would like to see from that company to start that conversation, I always think that that's really, really useful. And like I said, there's no right or wrong way of doing it. A lot of it does start with a conversation, and how you approach that conversation is dependent on when you interact with somebody for the first time. So I think just as long as you continue to remain honest about it and continue to see it as a dialogue and a conversation rather than an application and a kind of regimented bang, 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 it has to be done like this, then you'll probably be a bit more successful. But I think in these times in particular, like I said, it is harder to recruit people that you don't know, particularly at a junior level, because I feel quite strongly that when you are at a junior level, it's imperative on the more senior people to take you under their wing and kind of train you up, for want of a better phrase. And it's harder to do that when you're in a bedroom and somebody else is on a line somewhere else and they're not in the same office, and you can't pick up the phone to an exec and just say, oh, can I just chat to you about this? Because it feels like a much bigger deal. Slowly we've become all a bit more realistic about that. But I do think it is more a challenge, and I am sympathetic of that challenge. I would argue that hopefully in the next few months that will ebb away as we go back to being in offices, etc. But the whole working from home thing, I do think has an impact on more entry level people coming into the industry, because they do need that face-to-face contact. They need to see what's going on. They need to see how to conduct themselves in an office and who speaks to who and what the hierarchy is and etc. And you can only really learn that by observing rather than just continually jumping into a call and having a conversation about it. So my hope is that we will get back to that place, because I think it's really essential. And for now, we just all have to be a bit more honest and a little bit more assertive without being rude, to make sure we're getting the answers that we want.
I think there's some interesting points coming up in the chat here, which we'd expect about people saying it hasn't always worked for them, sending CVs. And this is a thing we hear a lot, is people saying they'd like their work to speak for them, the work to speak for itself. How much do you look at, you know, do you click on a link of work somebody's sent you, and what's the balance between what you're looking at on CVs? How do they get to show you that?
I mean, I generally do. I mean, it's you know, when you're doing the whole review process with applications, you know, I do generally sort of lock myself away and give myself time to go through, because you can't do bits and bobs throughout sort of other projects you might have going on. You do need to concentrate on it, and if you're the first sort of, you know, get the gatekeeper and you take a selection to go to other people, then you've got to be absolutely sure that you are picking the right person or the right group of people to go forward. So yes, I do definitely check work, and it's one of those things. I do sort of, you know, because I do a lot of graphics and animation, and in my field, and originally I used to get, it's another, someone else has done another sort of sci-fi robot with 2 legs, and you know, it's the common go-to sort of first 3D graphic that, you know, that people tend to sort of make. You know, so just make a sort of 3D walker or robot, because they're simpler to model, and they do that's a lot of projects and 3D courses do set them as sort of, you know, as sort of, you know, projects to do. But then I kind of thought, there's more to it than that. You've got to sort of see, well, let's read between the lines. It might be just the model, but you can gauge a lot more from the way they've done it, the way they've lit it, the colours. You just got to look between the lines, and you get a lot of that through just a few seconds of video. And I almost instantly, within the first sort of 30 seconds of a show reel, I can get a pretty good picture of someone's talent and what they've got and what they can offer, and what you can build on, which is fundamental. And going back to a very important point that Faraz made, which I think I just want to highlight as well, is yes, working remotely, it's just about doable. But I think for younger people, those willing to learn, all my experience came from sitting next to people. All my experience was like looking over someone's shoulder and seeing, well, how they do that, and they turn around and say, well, the little tip I'll give you, which is just crucial, is done by face to face. And I think hopefully, yes, very soon, fingers crossed, we'll get back to the moment where we can have new people starting junior roles, junior positions coming in, and they do sit alongside us again, and they do, or just being in an open plan office, they pick up on a conversation and think, well, that's the way they solve that problem, and you don't get that obviously on Zoom and working remotely. So, but yes, going back to the video, yes, I do watch them, and yes, and they are important, but don't try to make them too long, obviously, because we have limited amounts of time. But but just again, it comes back to, again, just putting the nuggets and looking again at the role. If there's anything specific that you have, or any work that you've done, or anything that's really that specific, focus it on that application. Just bring it to the forefront, make us see it first, make us see, well, yes, that's relevant to the job, that's something I've done, that's something I'm good at. Try and push that all up front to be front in line.
Thanks, Darian. And I think when we spoke before as a group, there was some good examples of how people had approached you during lockdown to kind of create opportunities for themselves, and things they might have written in their emails, or approaches they might have taken. I mean, do people still phone you? How would a phone call be received in lockdown? Any good examples of how someone's actually turned this into an opportunity for themselves and approached you?
We had a call about 2 months ago for someone who was looking just in like an assistant, production assistant role, and they had done some production. They were fairly new into the industry, and it was one of those things. And it comes back to the same thing, whether it's a phone call, whether you send an email, or in better times, whether you actually come through the door. I mean, prior to lockdown, we had people literally qualking in and ringing the doorbell saying, look, I'm going around the neighborhood here in Soho. I mean, it's one of the good things about being in Soho, because there's quite a few of us here, so you can do quite a few companies in a short lap. And he's, do you mind if I just drop my CV off? And yeah, by all means, you've made the effort. You're going out there. You're going to drop your CV off. That's perfect. Obviously, I know people quite can't do that at the moment, but again, it's just taking the chance. It's showing passion. It's showing the fact you're keen, and you really want to give. You really are sort of trying to get into the industry and give it a go. And so yes, just don't be afraid of sending a CV in. Don't be afraid of calling. We sometimes we have to be brief on a call, obviously if we're busy, but we will always answer, and we'll take a note of who you are and give you details of where to send a cover letter or introduction or CV to us.
Faraz and Emily, did you have any examples of things that have been working?
I think if somebody cold called me, I'd freak out. Like, I think we're in the age now where we think it's probably a scam and someone's trying to get my national insurance number. I think, again, I keep coming back to this thing about advocacy. We've had a few people, I've spoken to a few people because they were recommended to me by someone that I already know and trust. And when you're kind of just coming at somebody completely cold, it is difficult for you to be to make a kind of one size fits all judgment on that person. So it may be that you kind of get in touch with somebody because, like, for instance, this may not necessarily be right, but the kids show that we're doing right now, I'm not telling people to do this, I'm just saying as an example, but we may, we've got some animation that's part of the kids show that we're doing, and we haven't made that animation, and it says on the credits who has made the animation. So if somebody kind of emailed me saying, hey, I really like your show, I quite like animation, like, you know, could you put me in touch with the people that did that? That may be more successful, because then the email's coming from me, who's worked with that company, and said, hey, I've been in touch with this person's got in touch with me, I think they've got a really nice CV, do you want to start that conversation? And just that extra step that you've gone through to kind of go, right, how can I get this conversation going, can be really, really helpful. And it's different for different people. I had a call yesterday with somebody who who's looking to be a new entrant into, it has done lots of work in different countries and has come to the UK and is trying to make a name for themselves over here. And they were recommended, well, that introduction was made through a very senior commissioning editor at the BBC. Now, the senior editor at the BBC says that I need to take that call, I'm going to take that call. That's not obviously open for everybody to kind of be able to make those connections. But I think that you'll find that if you are able to like I said, build advocacy and have people kind of go, look, I'm not necessarily coming to you for a job, but I'd quite like you to help me speak to the right person. That, and I think, can sometimes be quite successful. And it's helping you build a story about what I came to a conversation with you because of X, Y, Z. I do think that, like, when it comes to cold calling, sending an email, seeing what happens, a lot of that just simply comes down to a luck of the draw, particularly with smaller companies. If we've suddenly got crazy busy and we need certain types of people to do certain things, then those emails will be the most valuable thing in the world. But that is genuinely a roll of the dice and a chance thing. I mean, if you're really innovative, you can keep an eye out on what's being commissioned and what's out there and send an email. But more often than not, programs are announced after they're made because they want to be announced quite close to when they're transmitted. So that can be, even for me, that can be quite difficult to find out what people are looking for and how we can get involved in that conversation. So keep trying, and just because you don't get an email back straight away, I try and reply to everything that I can, but it's still very, very hard. But don't ever think that because you didn't get a response to your first email means that you'll never get a response ever again. More often than not, it's likely because you've got somebody who was crazy busy trying to deliver 6 projects at a time, and you were quite far down a to-do list. Just change up your approach and see if you can kind of connect with somebody in a different way.
Thank you. Emily?
Just a couple of things, actually. First of all, just talking about, you know, how do people make a good impression? People that have impressed me recently have done their research, and then they come to me and say, oh, I saw that you did an interview and you talked about motivation, and I thought you'd really like these 2 TED Talks. So anything, you know, the whole idea is that it's not just transactional, this relationship. We want to build relationships with people. So don't just think of yourself as, oh, this is me, I'll send my CV. Offer something. It's a book, it's a link to a funny film, you've looked at the company's profile, you thought that they had this great talent, and you've actually seen somebody else when you were on holiday last year, you film them on your phone, you've got their details, they're really keen to be filmed in the future. So try and think of it as, what can I offer you? And not just, I want to work for your company, but send us something, make a really good impression by be thoughtful, and don't just think of, if you want a successful future in the industry, never be transactional. So often people just contact you, I need a job now. What about in between? Keep that relationship going. I sort of see it as keep all the fires burning. Don't just go and work for a company, leave, and then not stay in touch with them, because you never know when you might want to work with them again, or they might recommend you to somebody else. I think often people are a bit intimidated by senior people in a company, but actually when you're at the top running the company, it can be quite lonely. When we used to have office parties, you know, if you're senior, people don't come and talk to you. So feel bold and think to yourself, that person's on their own at the bar, let me go and talk to them. Or at the moment on Zoom, if you want to ask somebody a question but you don't get a chance in a webinar, follow up with them after. People love, as Faraz said, being asked for their advice. You know, we've been in the industry for a long time. We hire lots of people. We see all of these CVs and these approaches. Just on the note of how do you motivate yourself working at home? One thing I would say is when you're junior, and this is something that a lot of people have said to me, is what they find difficult and have done during the lockdown is when you're junior, you're scared to ask the senior person because they're super busy. At what point do you ask them? You're at home and you're waiting and you're thinking, help, I'm stuck, I can't move forward, but they haven't contacted me and I sent them an email 2 hours ago. I would say that when you start with a new company and with a new person and it's on Zoom, say to them, how do you like to work? Shall I check in with you at the beginning of the day? Would you like me to summarize what I've done each day at the end of the day? So don't be afraid to ask those questions, because it's actually what people that are under stress love to hear is, you know, how do you like to work? Tell me, how do you like to communicate? Shall I call you? Shall I email you? And then in terms of motivation, how do we all motivate ourselves? I think one really simple thing is think of the person that you find gives you the most energy. It doesn't have to be someone you work with professionally. It can be someone who's just a personal friend, and have a check-in with them once a week for 10 minutes, ideally on a Monday, and just say, what are you doing this week? Are you working? If you're not, who are you approaching? You don't even need to be in the same industry. It's just having that motivator and that person that when you finish that call, you're like, yes, you know, this is my week. I'm going to send out those 10 emails and CVs. So I think that that's key. And also put your phone away for considered periods of time so you don't fall down the rabbit hole of social media.
Cheers. And I guess we kind of had one question that's coming from a couple of people that might be a good place to sort of, I guess, move towards bringing this to a close as we're nearly out of time. And that's, I think, something that comes up a lot from our students, which is people who are saying they're applying for what are entry-level roles, they're applying for internships or kind of runners positions, and when they apply, they're having replies that say they don't have enough experience. And I guess what they're asking is, if you're looking for roles to gain experience and then you're hearing about that you don't have enough, how can they demonstrate enough enthusiasm or interest or experience through their course to leap that hurdle?
I think the first bit of bad news around that is that never ends. I'm a company, and every time I pitch an idea, the amount of times I hear as a company, well, you're nice, but we're not going to hire you because you haven't got the right experience in this field. It can be really frustrating as you're trying to grow something that's and so that can be. I can continue to empathise about how that can be tricky, no matter what level you're at. I think that the reality is, and again, it comes back to this point in time that, like, you know, I do think that we need to be realistic about the fact that it is difficult for someone that has literally zero experience in this industry to kind of bring them into a fold of a team when you're not even going to get to meet them. They're not going to be around a situation where they can learn. We need to kind of start to do a bit of a rethink about how you can fit into the team and what you can offer that team, and how you can communicate that is always going to be the challenge. And just to kind of just cycle back slightly, because I think it's related to the conversation about sending links and if people click on them or not. I think it's entirely dependent on the sort of job that you're applying for. I think for the post-production work and the graphics work and anything that has a technical skill, then it is imperative that you do demonstrate what you have done and what you're used to working on, what software you're used to working on, what cameras you've worked on, etc. That's really, really essential. But the other thing I would say is that if you are looking at kind of more entry-level jobs, it's actually just as important to say what you want to learn as opposed to what you can do. So if you do go and say, look, I've seen that you guys do a lot of this and I really want to know more about that and figure out how it's made, you know, how that's, if I came to you as a company, I can do X, Y, Z, but I'd really like to learn about X, Y, Z. That again really demonstrates what you want to grow into and excites me as an individual about bringing you on board, because I can then help you grow in that direction. So I think that that's really, really useful, again, to kind of just demonstrate who you are and you're not just another CV in a pile. But the reality around experience and how you solve that problem, it is tricky. There is no one straight answer to what what you can do to solve that problem. I would say it is, if a company is hiring for entry level, particularly work experience or internships, and they're going back to you saying that you don't have the right experience, I think that says something to me about that sort of company. Because I would argue that if you are getting people in for internships or work experience, you shouldn't be asking for a significant amount of experience, because then you should be hiring those people properly and not just bringing them in for work experience and internships. So if you're getting those red flags, you know, have a bit of a rethink about if that's the sort of company you want to work for, and continue to kind of seek out the ones that give you a better feeling about the sort of person you want to be and the sort of company you want to work in. And the hope is that we'll get the pick of the best talent because other people have turned them down as a result.
Thank you. I think there's a quick question here about in these days of LinkedIn, when we all see put somebody's profile on LinkedIn and their photos there, whether you like to see photos on CVs. We would have said no traditionally, but are things changing?
It's been a real mixed bag, really, with the
Yeah.
CVs we've had lately. I don't say no, I don't say yes. I think it's up to you. For me, it doesn't make any difference, you know. But you know, it's yes, you're absolutely right. Certainly, with a lot of sites, you know, you do get a cover photo now. But yes, no, I mean, it's completely up to you. You know, and personally, it doesn't make any difference to me, really.
Do people reach out to you on LinkedIn, and does that work for you?
It does for me, yes. Yeah. Lots of people do. And I think it depends on who you are. I mean, there's no sort of rule whether you have to be on LinkedIn, but I think why not use it? You know, make the most of it, because capitalize on it and see who you find. And you can often, people have become much more interactive, I would say, on it now, posting articles. You might find a company you've never heard of before who posts something interesting. Just in terms of, sorry, just also going back, I love Faraz's expression, cycling back a bit, in terms of jobs as well, entry level, when you're applying, or work experience. You know, you may apply to kind of 12 big companies, 12 small companies, but also think in a more lateral way. It may not be that you get your first job at one of those Soho production houses or post-production, but there may be a small corporate company near where you live who's looking for someone. So I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be ambitious, but also think more creatively about what might just be around the corner where you live, rather than just always thinking that you're applying for jobs where 200 other people are also going to apply for them.
Oh, I nearly didn't unmute myself there. That's fantastic. Thank you for that, Emily. I guess we've got 4 minutes left. Does anyone want to do a quick 1 minute each, just as a takeaway that you might want all the students listening to take with them before we bring things to a close?
Just kind of adding to that whole LinkedIn social media thing, one thing I would say, and this is kind of dependent on if you're in work or not, but always shout about what you're doing. It's like, particularly if you're proud about it, don't ever be shy by saying, I was a runner on this production and I'm really excited about it coming out, or whatever it might be. Like, we always look at it and see it, you know, we're always a little bit over obsessed with social. So if you kind of like tweet about something that you're really excited about, either because you've worked on it or because you've seen it and want to work on that sort of show, you know, make sure that you're using social in that way to get yourself noticed. But I think it's almost imperative that people from junior levels do like repost things on their Facebook, on their LinkedIn, to demonstrate that they are excited about the job that they've done and the sort of stuff that's coming out that will get you remembered. And so make sure it's not just a kind of one-way entry point, but also on the way out of the door. You know, if you finish a production, make sure you do kind of bring that in there, because I think that the more that we demonstrate that we love working in these sort of industries, the more you will get remembered, because it is meant to be fun. That's kind of the joy of working in this space. And I think that, like, you know, it is hard. It's a hard time in particular. We've you know, had our ups and downs as part of this period, and we thought that we'll be back to normal by now, but obviously it's taking a little bit longer than we hoped. I can only imagine how difficult it is for people that are in education or in new entries. I kind of really sympathize with some of the challenges that you face, but I think that if you can all advocate for each other, all get together in groups and continue to kind of support each other, that is going to be the solution, both from a mental health point of view and also come from a career advancement point of view. And I guess from the final point on my side, and you know, I'm not shy about saying this, I really struggled to get a job, so I set up my own company, and I still struggle to get commissioned as a result. But like, you know, I tried to get the sort of job I wanted to get, and no one would give me a chance. So I thought, you know what, screw it, I'll do it myself. And that's led me to kind of being on this side of the table. That's not available for everybody, but I think that if you are able to, you know, demonstrate that resilience and keep pushing for what you want to do, because you believe that what you can do has advantage, I think that you will kind of see yourself get there in the end.
Yeah, no, and to follow on that, absolutely, I agree. I think, you know, I was saying, you know, it took me a great deal of, you know, email, well, in my day, letter writing, and you know, knocking on doors and just persevering and showing passion, and that's the two words I think that are the diehard two words for me. That nothing, regardless of how you apply, and you know, it's all about perseverance and passion, just to sort of say, well, I've got the passion to do this job. I really want to get into this industry, and persevere with it, because it will happen if you keep doing that. And I think, you know, eventually, I was doing sort of, you know, just doing running roles. I was making tea for all for summer once, and working weekends, and just trying any opportunity I just get to sort of be alongside anybody on any job. And going back to Emily's point, it didn't have to be a big feature. Corporate video was fine. You know, it just meant about being there on something, you know, that was being shot, was being filmed. You know, and I could get some experience on under my belt, and then you can just take that in incremental steps and get more and more and more and more and more, and it happens. And then eventually, if you just keep going, show that perseverance, you will get there.
Fantastic. And then, not to rush you, Emily, but any last
sorry,
thoughts?
have I got 30 seconds? Well,
About
first of
30
all,
seconds,
just following on from Darian and Faraz, I mean, just never ever give up this industry, regardless of whether you're an executive producer or a runner. You know, there are bumps along the way, whatever level you are, and you just have to remind yourself of that. It's a freelance world. You know, contracts are short, they're long, but it is exciting. You're coming into it at the most challenging time we've ever had. And so you just need to hang in there, and also just make sure that when you're kind of thinking about, if you're frustrated at the moment, for example, thinking, God, look, I can't even find work, what am I meant to do? Well, you know, I'm in all of these groups, like documentary groups, entertainment groups. Just create fun with your friends, you know, whether it's you're going to have a book club on Zoom, or just try and think about ways that keep you going, keep you smiling, and keep those contacts. And in a way, like Faraz says, and I think it's so important, you get jobs through people, your peers, they recommend you. I've heard about a job at this company. So your network is key to your future. So make sure you cultivate those friendships you have now and those relationships. And finally, there's a very good book that I would recommend to everyone by Elizabeth Gilbert called Big Magic, which if you haven't read, and I think particularly at the moment, it's a wonderful book to read. So I would recommend that. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and she's written this book all about being creative and how she struggled, and she's very successful. So, and as Darian and Faraz said, we've all had our challenges in terms of finding work. I've got a box, although I haven't got it anymore, of letters, rejection letters, when I wrote to production companies to get a runner's role. And then the final thing I just wanted to say is ask people, how did you get into the industry? If you're on a webinar, you know, get their story, because it's amazing how inspirational it can be, but also how helpful. And you'll learn that everyone had their challenges along the way.
Well, thank you. That's I think a great place to sort of bring this to a close. I have just popped in chat the email for the careers team, which is industry@rave.ac.uk, for any of the participants or anyone who's watching on YouTube now that wants to get in touch. Well, I guess anyone who's watching on YouTube who's a Ravensbourne student, visions there of suddenly having thousands of external people getting in touch with us for careers advice. But thank you all for taking the time out to kind of join the session. That's been really fantastic to have you here. And thank you to everyone that was able to attend today. So yeah, cheers. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. Bye.